possibly have a visit to Nice. We've done 3 days of filming, just about got lucky with the weather. Thought we'd pass by and have a catch up with an old friend, Joe Dombrowski, from the early Cannondale days. Want to catch up and see how you're doing now. So what's the latest?
Yeah, I actually just came from a team camp in Girona last week. We were reconning some stages for Catalonia, which I'll leave in about a week for that. It's my next race. So just back home and hanging out in Nice and have a bit of an easy week, so mostly just enjoying.
How much time do you actually have back home though? Because I mean, in between racing and then the training camps, normally you think, well, great, off season, coming into the season, great, tons of time back home, but it's not really like that, is it?
No, not really. And I mean, so I was just down in Girona for a week. Now I'll be back here in Nice for a week, race Catalonia. And then from there, I'll be home 6 days. And after those 6 days, I go to Circuit de la Sarthe, which is 4 or 5 days, straight to altitude camp in Tenerife, straight to Tour of Romandy, home to Nice for 2 days, and then to the Giro. So in 2 months, I'll be home 2 days.
Oh man, I was going to say, it's a really nice apartment you got here. I know why it's so nice, because it's always clean, isn't it? You never hear. So it's a big objective, the Giro then?
Yeah, I think so. The Grand Tours suit me, and I particularly like the Giro. So the aim is sort of Romandy into the Giro, and then also Tour of Swiss in June, are all kind of races that I quite like. They're suited to me, and I find, for whatever reason, that period of the year I always seem to ride my best. Yeah. It seems like no matter what I'm doing in training, sometimes I'm not quite there in the early season races. You know, you turn up to something like Paris-Nice or Tirreno, and I just don't feel like I have that punch that the other guys do. But then as we get a bit deeper into the season, always kind of in the same time period, I feel like I sort of find my feet. And I don't really know why that is, but it just... What
happens when in the summer? Do you find that, I mean, I know some riders, you know, with allergies or whatever, the high pollen and things like that, do you ever get affected by that?
No, I don't really have any allergies. I do prefer racing in the heat. I think I'm quite tall and skinny, so I'm sort of like a big radiator. Yeah. So in terms of performance, I'm quite suited to riding in hot conditions. And I think also those races, once we get into May, June, July, tend to just suit me a bit more. I mean, you naturally, because it's getting warmer, the races tend to go into the higher mountains, and you get into some longer climbs, and the racing generally is just a bit less fast and punchy. Yeah.
The season's sort of settling down then, people are finding their form, and it's taking a bit more of a, well, it's never going to take a perfect flow, but you know, you can feel maybe a bit more relaxed with where you're at in the season.
Yeah, I think that too, you know, it's sort of hard to quantify, and it's not something that you would pick up on from watching the race on TV, but if you talk to pro riders in the bunch, I think most guys would tell you that if Paris-Nice is sort of and the classics is the height of nervousness in the peloton, and you know, just generally aggressive riding and a lot of crashes and what have you, it seems like it kind of, that dissipates a bit. And I mean, you see it again for the Tour. Obviously the first week of the Tour is super dangerous, but you know, then you get to the Vuelta and you can just feel that it's a bit more relaxed. And I think that's probably just wear and tear of a long season. You know, guys everyone comes into the season super fresh and really motivated, but for some guys, maybe that motivation's dwindling a bit as you get...
Well, I think in Spain as well, it's just their personality. It's just everyone in Spain's relaxed. It's like, we're going to start a bit later, we're going to make the stages a bit shorter, we're going to enjoy it. Obviously, Tour de France is the biggest race, so there's not quite as much media attention, and it's just, everything's this Spanish mentality, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's just like, make it nice and relaxing for the riders, and everyone's going to enjoy it. So I was thinking, and when we spoke a couple of years ago, I remember you were talking about big rides in the mountains, and that was when certainly my ears pricked up, and I thought, I can relate to that. In terms of what would be your ideal sort of mountain stage, or if you get to a stage race like the Giro, for example, is there something which you're really targeting and you think, crikey, if I could just write this stage for me, what would it look like?
Well, actually, in the Giro in 2016, there was a stage. We're here in Nice, and I've lived here basically my whole professional career and spent a lot of time training in the mountains behind. And there was one stage which I was quite fond of and kind of had circled from early on the year before that was a target. And we finished on the Italian side of Col de Lombard. We went over Col de la Barnette, down, up Lombard past Isola 2000, and then finished just a bit on the Italian side. And it was sort of a dream stage because it had, several long climbs. It was all at altitude. And I just was really looking forward to it because I love the riding around Nice. And I think some of my favorite riding in this area is I've done, sort of do-it-yourself altitude camps out at Isola 2000 because it's just a short drive from the city, and it's amazing how remote it is very quickly once you get out into the Mercantor National Park, and it's just a different world. I mean, I was out there even this past fall for a few days, and I ran into Transhumance, which is like where the shepherds bring their flocks of sheep down the mountain for the winter time. And it's like, you see this and you're thinking like, I can't imagine that this guy has an iPhone and is, connected to the world. Like the bustling French Riviera coastline is only as the crow flies, 50 or 60K away. Yeah. But it's like stepping 200 years back in time.
We bumped into a shepherd on the João in the Dolomites.
Yeah.
And Michele, our videographer, is Italian, so it was good. We could actually have a good chat with him. And he was moving his flock over to, I think it was like Romania or Slovenia. And he was just, walking, and there was two of them. And one walks, one drives the vehicle, and then they rotate. Yeah. And they just know the paths and trails and tracks to take. And I mean, we were making a video and we met him, and it was an amazing sort of moment to actually meet a proper shepherd doing what he does. And I was thinking, well, we're going to put this out and other people are going to see this. He's never going to see it.
Yeah.
It's just gone. It's a moment gone. For us, it's priceless, but he's gone. And it's moments like that, actually, which for me, when I'm out in the mountains, they put me back in reality, where I'm like, actually, the hustle and bustle which you might have in your everyday life when you look out the window is so far removed from why we all ride. You ride to escape. You ride to, you're racing, so you're going back into the fire pit almost. Yeah. But when you're out doing your Isola 2000 high altitude camps, or you're in the Mercantor, I'd imagine it's freedom.
Yeah, it's, I mean, I love racing as well. And, there's that whole aspect of it, which is obviously totally different to training. But I think, I think I really enjoy all the aspects of my lifestyle of being a professional cyclist. And I do really enjoy training as well. Some guys, it's just sort of a means to an end. And it's like, you got to train because you have to be fit for the race. But if I could just race more so I didn't have to train so much, then that would be better. Yeah. But I quite enjoy training, and particularly when I can be out in places like that where it's an interesting experience because you see everything firsthand, but kind of when you're on a bicycle, you're at a speed that you can really take that in. And I don't think you really experience that, say, in a car.
In terms of the actual, when you say you enjoy the training, is it the numbers, the quantifiable data that you get back and go, yes, I've done a good training session, I can now analyze it to try and improve? Or is it just the purity of, I just like going out riding my bike?
I think it's a bit of both. I mean, I'm interested in the numbers and the data, and there's, I think, more and more of that in the sport and more of that available to us. Yeah. But at the same time, I feel like you can, it seems like that's really proliferating the amount of information that we have available in terms of like what we've done when we've gone out on our bikes. But really, I've almost like been a bit turned off from some of that, because it's like, okay, you can collect all this information and you can think about training as like, you're going out and doing these efforts, and then you're collecting all this data and then reviewing the data. And it's like, but really, when you think about what you're doing and like what you may change with all that information you've collected, it's like, well, are you really going to change anything? Like, you're still going to go out and ride your bike. Yeah. Sometimes you're going to ride it hard. Sometimes you're going to be tired, so you'll take it a bit easy. Yeah. And obviously, it's like a bit more nuanced than that, but it can be a bit fatiguing, like the constant like focus on that. So, but I don't find fatiguing just going out and riding my bike. I mean, it is fatiguing, but
from a physical sense, but
yeah,
mentally, yeah.
But I enjoy getting out and riding my bike, and I've been lucky in this career to see, I think, some of the most amazing places I've been and experienced have been from my bike.
I mean, it's taken it like at the pace which we should be taking it at. We're trying to, it's always like life now is so frenetic that, you always feel that you're one step behind. You're trying to catch up. You've got social media plowing in at all directions. You're a brand in yourself now. You're not just a bike rider. Right. The brands which sponsor you and support you, you have a certain commitment to have to be able to promote that product and that brand. And I mean, it's tiring on top of training and everything. So I think the disconnect when you can go out, you've got the numbers, you need the training, you need everything which is going to get you to, that level you need to be at a certain point in the season. But that disconnect, I think, is getting so important. And it's quite interesting to hear you say about, just going out and riding just for the love of it, really.
And I think even from a performance standpoint, I mean, bike racing and sport in general is a bit primal. It's like, it's not about analyzing every XYZ detail. You just kind of have to go out and do it, and a lot of it's by feel. And I think sometimes you can get caught up in some of those details and sort of miss the mark, even performance-wise in the race, because it's like, you don't want to lose your...
It's instinct.
Yeah, exactly.
Because there was a big debate a couple of years back where it was race radios, and then it was like power meters, should they be banned? And it's like, I can totally get it if you've got teams who are just controlling the race and you say, well, okay, they've attacked, but it's not going to stick. We're just going to sit here and ride at 6.5 watts a kilo.
Right.
Job done, And it's like back in the olden days, a guy attacks off the front, and it's just, that's the drama of it. It's like, is he going to hang out the front? Are they going to let him go? And, I can see, it's a business at the end of the day. We're fans. We want to see aggressive racing.
Right.
You're in the circus of trying to make that racing, but you're going to know straight away if you've attacked at such a high wattage.
Right.
It's doomed to fail.
And the thing is, too, there's been a lot of chatter, especially a few years ago, about the whole power meters influencing racing. But honestly, I think that professional riders are so in tune with, what, like how sustainable an effort is, that aside from time trialing, where, okay, like you definitely use the power meter for pacing, I wouldn't say guys really look at their power meters much. And if anything, there's loads of guys that put tape over the numbers so they can't see it because they don't want to. Because if anything, they sort of think that it's a bit of a mental handicap. Rather than, and it's almost like blunting that like primal instinct.
They're just taking the numbers for later. I did a new 5-minute best power.
Yeah, or even like for, nowadays in teams, there's so much infrastructure around rider support that like they might not even look at it, period. Like it just goes to the team staff and coaches, and they can do.
So you would say that kind of, you know, your power meter blows up at the day one of the Giro, when you're like, okay, yeah, you know, theoretically you can't get it fixed, whatever. You'd be like, that's no problem. I can pretty much ride this. Yeah, bar the odd stage here and there, which might be affected. You can go on feel. You've got the experience. Just be like,
yeah. I don't think it. I mean, it's nice to have the data just to look at afterwards and look at trends.
Put it on Strava and
put it on Strava, and I think even, you know, like when things are not going well, it's always good to have that data to look back at, and it's like, okay, well, you know, did I maybe do a bit too much here in whether it's training or racing? But in the race, it doesn't really matter if you've done too much. Like you go do the race and do your job. So it's like, who cares what the power meter says?
It's interesting actually, because sometimes I bet you'd find that the days where you're not feeling good, you actually do a really good, your numbers are really good. It's like, so mentally or whatever, you're like physically, oh no, I'm down, I'm tired, you're maybe getting a little cold or something, and then you go out and do some incredible performance. The numbers quantify it.
Right.
In your head, you're like, oh, I'm going to quit, I'm out.
Right. Well, and the thing is, like, I mean, and that's why I think that, you know, you see, for example, some riders taping over their data on the power meter or head unit, because it can sort of, you know, validate that you start to think that you feel bad, and then you see, oh, like, well, you know, I'm doing 350 and I feel terrible. Like
brain starts.
Yeah, and then you
working
know,
against you.
Your brain is your worst enemy,
Yeah.
and really, I think that, you know, that is the most important component of performance is your brain. Really, like that's the biggest limiter beyond anything else that's going to hold you back.
Yeah, I agree with that. It's the amount of people where it's like they're almost convincing themselves that they can't do something before actually trying to see if they can do it. And it's just sort of psychological, and your whole mentality, positive attitude to wanting to push that much harder and see what you can get out of yourself. It goes hand in hand. You need both things. You can't just suddenly be like, I'm just going to wish myself to be that much faster or that much better. But it could be easily the difference between actually hanging into the front group and just, you know, finishing up in the gruppetto.
Right.
Just because your mind's not in the right frame of mind. So
right.
That's interesting.
And I've certainly had occasions, like I think some of the times that I've had my best performances have been like I've had a head cold or I haven't been sleeping well. And obviously, like those things are certainly not helping your performance, but it's easy to fixate on something like that.
Yeah.
And like sometimes you feel great and you're not performing well, and it's just not clicking. But then sometimes, you know, you have these small adversities that in reality are probably pretty small impacts on your performance or your potential to perform. And then, you know, if you can manage to kind of not worry about it, then sometimes you actually really surprise yourself.
Do you ever find that in a stage race, something, say in the first week, which you'd never even really think about, a little niggle here, you'd just be like, whatever. By the third week, it can actually be really playing on your mind because you're getting that much more fatigued. It's kind of like, 3 weeks in, that small niggle at the start of the race that you would have just brushed off is suddenly, you know, psychologically you're having to try and like really get over something because it could be that little bit of cold coming on or whatever it is, you know. Do you ever find that it's the accumulation kind of?
I would say that actually, and I think this sort of points further to the fact that like your brain is often in control of how well you perform. I would say that I feel that happens more frequently in training, because in training, you know, you're always thinking like, oh, how do I feel? Should I take it easier today? Should I do a bit more? You know, you consult with a coach and you make a plan, and you know, you're not paying attention to where you're positioned in the bunch or not crashing or, you know, not missing your feed bag or whatever. And in racing, there's so many of these distractions, and they're not distractions, but things that you need to focus on besides just going out and pedaling your bike. And I think that because of that, you maybe you have like a small little issue at the first week of a stage race, but it turns out that you're just so focused on
you don't even realize
executing in the race that you just forget about it. Yeah. Whereas in training, you don't have all that distraction, and it's easy to, that's like in training, you go do intervals and we are prescribed a power output. You look at your power meter and, maybe you're not exactly able to hit the power numbers you're prescribed. So then you start thinking, oh, well, this little issue I had, maybe it's that. And like you start thinking about it and it's like, well, in the race, you're focused on the race. So a lot of times I find that you forget about that stuff. Yeah. But I would say that sometimes, maybe you have a sore knee or something, and it's kind of almost like I would say that applies more to training, in my opinion, where sometimes you could almost create a problem that's not really there.
Yeah. So how about you're 26 now? Mm-hmm. And just incidentally, that stage which you were talking about over the bonnet at Lombard, you did all right at that stage, didn't you? You finished third.
Yep.
Which was a pretty handy result. So moving forward into this year's Giro, have things changed as you've sort of developed as a rider? Obviously results have come. You've done, 5 Grand Tours, is it?
Yeah. Yep. Couple Giros, 3 Vueltas.
Are we going to see a new sort of team leader, Joe Dombrowski, or are we because you're normally supporting Rigo or one of the other guys.
Yeah.
But you've got the potential yourself. I mean, it's there. It's just nurturing it and taking the time. So
yeah.
Are you taking an extra step up, or what's the role?
Well, when I look back at last year, 2017, I had a bit of a lean year in terms of results, and things didn't go quite as I was hoping. I think it was a combination of a bit of, like, I had a crash in training and had some knee problems after that, and was probably training a bit much early on in the year.
Back on form.
Yeah, and things didn't really go super. I had a few rides where it was like, okay, like this is where I know I can be. Yeah. But overall, the season was a bit bumpy. 2016 was a good year for me. And so far, I think I'm on a really good track. Yeah. It's still very early. I have done one race thus far. I did Ruta del Sol, and it went well. It was a bit hard to gauge exactly where I am because we had a sort of sprint-focused team. So I was doing mostly just trying to control breakaways. So it was a lot of riding on the front. Yeah. And we ended up winning a stage. And overall, I felt like, I feel pretty strong. That's not necessarily my
forte
sort of niche, but I felt good. And I think, I got Catalunya next week. And we have a really strong team there, actually. It's myself, Mike Woods, Rigoberto Urán, Pierre Roland, Nate Brown, Alex Howes, and someone else. I think that's 6. Yeah. Because we got 7
a strong
now.
team, yeah. A lot of Americans in there as well.
Yeah, it'll be, and I think that's an important race for the team as well because, they've been based in Girona since they started, and being in Catalunya, I'm the only rider on the team.
They couldn't lure you over to Girona and Catalunya.
No, so this will be my 6th year as a pro, 6th year in Nice, and I came here originally because my first 2 years I rode at Sky, and they have a similar setup to what my team has now in Girona here in this area. So they were quite keen on me being based here. And I didn't know too much about it at the time. I'd never been. And so I didn't really have any qualms other than I just knew that a lot of the American riders were based in Girona. So I suppose there was a bit of an allure to be there because, you're around people that you know, and maybe you feel like there's a bit more of a support network. And ironically, my first year here, I hated it. I I didn't enjoy it at all. Just felt super homesick. Wanted to go back to the U.S. And that may have happened anywhere in Europe.
Yeah.
You know, I was 21 at the time, so moving to a foreign country on your own at that age is difficult. And
one where you don't speak the language, and
yeah, I didn't speak any
culture
French.
is totally different.
Yeah, and it's funny to look back on now. Like even just things like I didn't have Wi-Fi in my apartment at first, and I couldn't quite figure out how to get it set up. And you know, you're trying to deal with.
Yeah, we know all about that.
Yeah, so I would.
3 months it took us to get it set up in France. Yeah.
So there was a restaurant down just like basically next to my old apartment, and they had Wi-Fi. So I would go there for dinner all the time, usually by myself.
Joe,
and bring my laptop and just connect to the Wi-Fi because it's like, well.
Yeah, I've got to get it done.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny to think about that sort of thing now because it's like, what are you doing? Like, it's so much easier than this. But
when you don't know, you don't know. Everything for the first time's a nightmare. I mean, we moved to France almost a year ago now, and prior to that, I'd lived in Switzerland when I was 21 as a kid. I went there on my own and lived there for 5 years, and setting up all sorts of stuff.
Yeah,
it was a different world. And then, last year, good few years on from that experience, same thing. We're scratching our heads like with all this paperwork and just to get the Wi-Fi set up. I went into Orange in the end, and I said, look, this is ridiculous. I'm trying to run a business, living in this new country. Let me just pay a year up front.
Yeah.
No, you can't do that. You have to do this, and this. I said, look, I can't do this anymore. I'm at McDonald's trying to use the Wi-Fi for free, sipping a juste a pomme for 2 hours,
Right.
Can't do it anymore. Let me pay for a year up front. And they said, no, we can't do it. So I was like, So I know. But then it's all sorted, and now you're thinking, no, it was actually pretty simple.
Yeah, and now I love it. I mean, now it's, I love the riding here. I think that it's amazing to me, the road, and I mean, it sounds like you guys have been doing some filming and you've been around the area a number of times.
Madun Dutel yesterday.
Yeah.
Tip from the top. That was your climb.
It's cool, right?
Yeah, well, you're going to have to wait and see. Viewers are going to have to wait and see, but yeah, I mean, it's very cool.
Yeah.
Very cool. Unknown climb.
The road infrastructure here is insane. Like, you have the bustle on the coastline, and it is a bit busy, but, when you get back into the mountains for training, there's roads everywhere.
You see the Mercantour, so all the snowy peaks. And you take one, it's like you've got the front line, let's call that the holidaymakers, the tourism, all that. You take one step back and you've kind of got the Madones and the Browse and the Turini, and then you take a step back from that and you're pretty much Lombard, Bonnet, all of that. You've got 3 layers which you can play around with at all different points of the year.
Yeah.
Everything changes, season on season it changes. So yeah, it's an amazing structure of just what you can do as a pro, airport, good weather, winter training. It's pretty hard to beat.
Yeah, and I also love the city too. It's there's a lot going on here. There's a lot of culture, and even if you're into like loads of museums, there's a lot of art galleries. Like whatever you might be into, there's something for you.
How's the language?
I actually speak okay French. And
how long did it take you? This is for me now.
So I started on it, I guess, 2.5 years ago. And actually, at first I was just playing around on, using apps on the iPhone. And then what actually really helped me a lot is when the team signed Pierre Roland. Yeah. And he came to the team and didn't speak a word of English. And I actually asked the team that we could be roommates at whatever races we did together.
Good move.
Just so that...
Get up in the morning, say something to me. Keep saying it to me the same morning. I'm going to know that by the end of the race.
Right.
Done.
And it worked really well in that I remember it was an October camp in Aspen, Colorado.
You were mountain biking out there, weren't you?
Yeah, we were mountain biking, and I was roommates with Pierre, and I was kind of looking forward to this opportunity, but it's just a bit awkward when you can't really converse with someone.
In here, you're like, I've got this one, I've got this
Yeah.
sentence, and then it's like,
Yeah,
No, I
and he
haven't.
couldn't speak English either, so it was a bit like.
awkward. You want to be teammates, but
right.
yeah.
And now we talk all the time, and we get along really well. And he's one of the guys that I'd say I'm closest to on the team.
Really?
So I think it was a matter of just speaking, and then from there, I think my other big takeaway was that, like when I'm back home in Nice, just they talk about like, young children being most adept at learning languages, but I actually think that my theory is that a lot of that is that when you're an adult, you're afraid of failure. You don't want to. You feel like you're going to sound stupid if you say, yesterday I go to the grocery store, and okay, yeah, that's not the correct tense, but everyone knows what you're saying, and if you start engaging with people, you learn, I think, the most by speaking. And as you engage, you see how they use different tenses and they use maybe slightly different vocabulary. And I found that just kind of like totally ditching any sort of fear of being wrong.
Fear of failure,
Yeah. And I think too that when you make an effort, people see that you're making an effort and are typically quite happy to slow down or use more simple language. Or here a lot of people speak English, so a lot of times they just break.
We're in a village where no one speaks English.
Yeah.
So you have to. Just talking to the farmer next door is like a challenge, and I feel so frustrated because I'm trying to learn, but then you just want to converse properly. I want to see how his day's going and what he's up to, and like different parts of the season he's doing different things, and it's just interesting. People's lives are just interesting. So you mentioned then about mountain biking when you're on the team camp, but I thought one of the coolest things I saw was it maybe last year you did Leadville. Was it 2 years ago?
I guess 2016.
2016.
Yeah.
And you were second in Leadville. And I came from a mountain bike background when I was a kid because that's what everyone did then. It's like, knobbly tyres, I'm doing that. And so your background was also mountain biking, is that right?
Yeah.
But I thought it was kind of cool the fact that you're kind of mid-season and you're obviously, you're paid to ride on the road, race on the road, but then you still manage to get that into the calendar and, the passion for mountain biking lives on sort of thing. But yeah, from a danger factor, I thought, I was praying that nothing, it's like skiing. I know in the contract, can't do this, can't do that.
Right.
The team were cool with you doing that?
Well, actually...
no, they weren't.
Well, that's the thing is, I think I was the one that first brought it up in 2015, and it was just sort of offhand. But they were actually the ones that really wanted me to do it. And I think it was a combination of Matt Bowden, who's our press officer, and JV, and Cannondale was also quite keen on it, just because, it's interesting. Like,
I thought, I was a fan from the outside, and I was like, oh, cool, Joe's doing it.
Yeah.
Is he going to win it? What's he going to do? Oh, he's a roadie. What's going to happen? And it was cool.
Well, and I think that people are intrigued by riders stepping out of, their typical discipline. Another example would be you saw Sagan do the Olympic mountain bike race.
Yeah.
And it's kind of like, well, it doesn't really matter if he finishes first or last or he has a mechanical or what, because everyone's just interested to see like how he goes. It's like if he finishes last, it's like, well, I guess he's not that good at mountain biking,
Yeah.
Or if he wins, it's like, well, wow, he can like really do a bit of everything. And then if he gets a mechanical and has to drop out, it's like, well, I guess we'll have to wait till 2020.
Yeah.
So I think that's quite intriguing for people, and I actually would like to do something like that again. I don't know if it would be Leadville or Alex Howes and I were jokingly talking about Cape Epic.
Yeah, that would be cool. Early season, good for the form.
Yeah, I don't know if it's exactly the right time of year. Leadville you can kind of swing because it's like if you've done the Giro or the Tour, maybe you can stick that in there, and if you're doing Utah or Colorado, it sort of works.
Yeah, it's a bit of a trek, isn't it?
Yeah.
Getting over there and making the logistics work, I guess.
Yeah.
It would be definitely a good one to do, though. It's got to be on the calendar.
Yeah.
Make it happen, Joe.
Yeah.
I'll be interested, so
Yeah.
we'll come and document it.
Something. I occasionally race a bit of cyclocross in the winter as well.
Around here?
No, just back home in the US, yeah. And that, it's a bit more difficult because it's like, one, it's so technique oriented that it's hard to ride your cross bike once and jump into a cross race and do well, but also, the start position's so important.
Yeah, and if you haven't been doing
them, you're like last place, so you're not going to be passing 100 guys. But it's fun, and I like mixing it up a bit. And I mean, even when I'm back home in the US over the winter, I do quite a bit of my riding off-road, whether it's cyclocross bike on dirt,
keeping warm and everything.
Yeah.
The slower you go, it's basically the speed which makes you cold with the wind chill. So you can ride a heavy bike and go a bit slower, you get a great workout and you don't get as cold.
Yeah.
It's technically as fun as well.
Yeah. Well, and like this winter we had a real bad cold snap, and there was a while I was taking out my cyclocross bike, and where I'm from in Virginia, there's a lot of gravel. You can do probably over 100K of 150K loop all on dirt. And we'd gotten a fair bit of snow, and it was just like hard packed snow on gravel. So I'd go out and do like 5 or 6 hours, fenders, insulated bottles, and I'd like alternate having one bottle in my pocket so that it wouldn't freeze, and just do these big long snow gravel rides, and it was actually a lot of fun.
It gets you in good shape. I tell you, it's hard work. So.
Yeah.
What I want to find out then is from the mountain bike side. I mean, where did the transition come to the road? And actually, going back further than that, you said 21 when you were picked up by Sky and signed for them for 2 years. Prior to that, there's got to be quite a backstory, because you don't just give Dave Brailsford a quick call and say, "Oh, I fancy a bit of European lifestyle.
Right.
Sign me up."
Yeah.
So how did it go from school mountain biking through to being on the world's biggest team at the time?
Right. So my first bike race, I was 14 years old, and I had basically been mountain biking with friends from high school on the weekends. And there were a few guys that, on Saturday or Sunday we'd go out, and at the time, like, it was our parents would drive us to trails and we'd ride. And one of the guys was a pretty serious mountain bike racer. And over the summertime, there was a local mountain bike series that was on Wednesday nights. And I jumped into that and did the junior race. I think I finished second or third. And I was just hooked. And most of the racing I did as a junior, I was all racing mountain bike. When I was 16 or 17, I started to pick up cyclocross, and I was doing quite a bit of that. But it was mostly all local. And then my last year of high school, I started racing a bit more on the road with a local club team, and I traveled the races on the weekend with them. And I just found that, I was jumping into some of like the category 1 local races, and I was winning and doing well. And it was actually a friend from my hometown who he used to live in Austin, Texas, and he was friends with and used to ride with Lance and Bart Naggs, who was Lance's manager at the time. And Bart helped run with Axel Merckx, Axel's development team, which has now been around for, I think, almost 10 years. And my friend Chris from my hometown sent Bart an email. It was like, "Hey, this kid he's pretty talented. He hasn't raced a whole lot, but maybe keep an eye out for him. I don't know like what your scouting looks like, but I'm just putting it out there." And I don't think I even knew that he had sent the email.
He's mapping your career out for you.
Yeah.
Is he your agent now?
No. We do still ride a fair bit though. And he then basically Bart replied and CC'd Axel Merckx, and the email got sent back to me, and I was like, wow, like, I can't believe that, Axel's replied. Yeah. And so then Axel contacted me, and he was like, hey, would you mind sending, maybe some of your training information if you have any power data, and like I'd like to follow some of your results. And like, of course, I followed through with that.
Yeah.
And I think also with the help of Ben King, who's another Virginia-based pro cyclist, who was on the team at the time, who sort of put in a good word. Axel asked if I wanted to stagiaire with the team at Tour of Utah in 2010. And I remember it's kind of a funny response. I emailed him back and I was like, well, I'm still a category 3. I need to like upgrade in time to be able to do the race. So I was in this big rush to become a category 1 so that I could do this UCI sanctioned race. And I flew out, raced with the team for the week, and it went well. And at the end of the week, Axel pulled me aside and he said, hey, if you'd like a spot on our team next year, we're happy to have you. And I was in my first year of university and doing that, and I just sort of figured, well, I'll give this a go, see how I do. And I did the fall semester, and then I'll take the spring semester off so that way I can, travel a bit, race with the team, and focus on that. And I did that in 2011, and it went really well, and I never went back to school. And at the time, like talking with my parents, I think they realized the value of the opportunity, but they were obviously also a bit like,
Well, parents are quite conservative sometimes.
Right.
It's like, well, if it's not a world that they know,
right,
then it's different. It's a big world out there. What's Joe going to do? How's he going to go? And you've just got to go for it. You've got to go for it. One opportunity,
Yeah.
So.
And so then I just sort of ran with it. And in 2012, it was my second full year at Axel's team, and I was getting good results. And I'd say like the peak of the year, I went over to Europe and was racing with the under 23 national team, and I won the baby Giro in both of the mountain stages there.
Yeah,
and
which is huge. I mean, because you would have been like well under, in terms of the age, you still had a few years to develop in that baby Giro. So it's like, it's almost like a junior winning an elite race. Going, what's this about?
Right. And from there was loads of interest from all these different teams, and honestly, I found it quite stressful. Like it went from this is fun. I'm traveling around with these guys who are my age, and we're racing, and I'm living the dream.
Yeah.
And to like sort of dealing with these somewhat high pressure negotiation type situations. At the time, I didn't have an agent, so I was fielding this all on my own. And as that progressed, I eventually started working with an agent, and I decided to go to Team Sky. So end of 2012, flew out to the first camp, and I signed for 2 years there. And initially the program that was laid out for me was quite ambitious for a neopro. The plan was to do, at the time, that was the year that Bradley Wiggins was going to do the Giro. And he had just won the Tour in 2012. Yeah. And the plan was that I was going to do the Giro. And I would do, it was something like maybe Tirreno, Catalunya, Pays Basque, Giro, like really pretty high level World Tour racing, and then straight into the Giro, being not the easiest Grand Tour to do as your first. And I was floundering a bit, and I had some knee problems, and ultimately, like, that time period there sort of became a wash, as I had, I ended up in 2014 basically stopping the season pretty early, and I had an operation on my iliac artery, which went undiagnosed for basically my whole time at Sky. So it was disappointing, and it was sort of one of those instances where like you're looking at your career and you step into your first World Tour team and you assume that, you know, like this is just the beginning. I'm going to do a 15-year career, and you know, you have these lofty ambitions to like, or this could be the end after year one, you know. And luckily, even though I wasn't going to be racing, and I still had a lot of good opportunities to go to other teams, and I could have even stayed at Sky. But I opted to go to Jonathan Vaughter's team, which at the time we were Cannondale Garmin. Yep. And I signed for 2 years there. And really things turned around pretty well. And, you know, I had some good results, like overall in the GC, good stages. I won my first professional race, and I won the GC that first year at the team at Tour of Utah.
Definitely, you like the altitude then. Altitude's your best friend, isn't it?
Yeah,
so
for sure.
It's like higher the better.
Yeah. And now this will be my 4th season at the team, and I love it. I mean, it's, you know, obviously we're not as big as Team Sky, and we may not have the same resources as them, but I really love the camaraderie. I think we operate almost as a family, and I've had a lot of great experiences, and it's been a good place for me to grow as a rider. And
I think the time, you know, having that sort of like family environment really, where you've grown up and you've got 4 years with a team now, you've got a bit more consistency. They know you, you know them. You know, it's like starting a new job when you go to a new team. It's like you've got to find your place, and you've got to prove yourself once again. Even so, you might have a long, illustrious palmares. Doesn't matter. You're on a new team now. What are you going to do for us? It's like extra stresses, extra strains. You can concentrate now on the future. You know where you stand. They've got confidence in you as a rider, as an individual. They know your setup. You know, they can rely on you. So I think it's a good place to be. It's exciting to see where the team's going to go as well. So
and you know, I think you're touching on changing teams. I think sometimes that changing teams can really bring a rider up a level. Almost like, not that there's anything wrong with where they were, but sometimes just a change of environment can be motivating, and you know, you're in a different set of circumstances, so sometimes that can be good. But I feel like I still probably have some room to run at this team, and I feel like it's a good place for me to grow. So
I was going to actually ask, well, there's a couple of things sort of changing teams, and I just suddenly thought to myself, Landa from Sky, suddenly in Movistar, and you've got Quintana, Valverde, Landa, and it's like, it's just going to be a big fight sort of thing. It's like, who's going to be doing what? Send them all to the big tour, see what happens, you know. Maybe not the best strategy, but hey, could work. But I was actually going to ask about, in terms of where you feel you are on the scale now, 26 years old, the experience that you've had from, it actually is an incredibly fast track sort of career that you've had. I mean, I remember when I started riding when I was 11, 12, took years and years and years to work yourself through the ranks. You were like, well, my first race was 14 and I signed for Team Sky at 21. Well, there's a nice period there where you're basically messing around after school. So we'll take that out straight away. So when you start getting serious, it's like 17. 4 years down the line, you're on the biggest team. Where would you say you are in the scale, or where you would hope, you know, if you've got a scale 1 to 10 or something, you're kind of at a X at the moment. You've still got ambitions here, but you've obviously got huge experience now with the last 5 years of racing pro and 6 years. So where do you feel, or how much more do you think you've got in terms of getting to where you want to be?
I'd like to think that I've got a lot of room to improve still, and I think that's the case. I guess, you know, in terms of concrete goals in the next, say even in this season, I think it would be really nice to win one of the big mountain stages in a Grand Tour. I've come close on a number of occasions to, you know, popping off a win on that sort of stage, but it's never like quite panned out. So I'd like to, I mean, that would be great. I think, to win, like a Queen Mountain stage.
From what we spoke about earlier, just from what you were saying about the mental side of it, I reckon if you can get that stage, it can open up. It's like you've got the stage now, pressure's off a little bit, and then it's like mentally, you can do it.
Right.
At the moment, it's just you can do it. You've
Right.
got the numbers there, the capacity, the engine, whatever, but you just got to do it now.
Right.
The moment you do it, I'm pretty sure that will be the moment where you're suddenly like, boom, here we go now. And it's like Joe takes another step up. Oh,
right.
Geez, we knew he had the potential, but now he's, so it's just getting that moment.
Yeah.
Finding that moment. That's the tricky thing, isn't it?
Right. And so I'd like to deliver on that. I think this year it would be nice to do a good GC in a World Tour stage race. And obviously that's like a bit more nebulous as to what that means.
Yeah.
Like I said earlier, I've won a GC before in like a HC level race in the US, but it would be nice to be, right at the front of like a Tour of Swiss or something like that, which I think suits me. But you need to deliver, and it's. I mean, in a way, racing for the GC somewhere is a bit of a defensive game because you're always trying not to lose time, especially if you're not, a Froome or a Quintana or a Valverde. You're always like limiting losses.
Then the tricky question now then is you're on for a good result GC, but you can see that mountain stage, but you might throw away your GC. What happens?
That's a tough question. It's like what's more valuable, like to you, what's more valuable to you personally, what's more valuable to your contract, what's more valuable to the team, what do fans remember more?
What do you want?
I mean, I can see where personally, let's say in the Giro, let's say if you had the option of finishing between 7th and 9th GC or winning like the Queen Mountain stage, I can see where you would, if you had never done a top 10 GC, I can see where you'd choose. I mean, this is obviously like, it's easier to talk about choosing these things. Like it's obviously very difficult to achieve, but I could see where if you've never done it before, you choose the top 10 because it feels like a real accomplishment to have put that together over 3 weeks. As far as what's more impactful to people watching, winning a big stage in a big way is an example would be within our team, Pierre Rolland has been top 10 in a number of Grand Tours, Tour de France and the Giro. But I don't think that when people think about Pierre Rolland, what he's done in his career, I don't think they think about him finishing somewhere in the top 10 in Tour de France. They think about him winning on Alpe d'Huez or La Toussuire. And that's what they remember. It's as hard as it is to say finish 8th in the Tour, it can be pretty anonymous. Like you never see that rider on TV. And not that that's necessarily what it's all about, but I would say that the stage win is probably more impactful. And which would I choose? If I were to just choose between the two, I would probably choose stage win. I mean, it's nice. Isn't it more interesting in cycling to race to win and to play for the win than to race to try and limit your losses to the fastest guy?
Yeah. I'd go out there all guns blazing if I had the opportunity.
Yeah.
Just say, right, that is it. I'm doing one stage. I'm going to try and win it.
Yeah.
And then I'm in the gruppetto.
Yeah.
Job done.
Exactly.
It's glory. Yeah. So what about how the sport's changing? I mean, we did a recon. It was amazing when the Tour route was announced for 2018. We saw the crazy 65k stage on there. We were like, 65k, and that's actually right where we live. And we were like, right, let's go and recon it. So we shot out there just before the snow came, and it's a nut stage. Bagnes-Luchon, straight up over Peyresol-Périgueux, straight down, up the Azette, straight down into the next valley, straight up the Pla d'Adet, turning off up the Portet. Never been done before. Higher than the Tourmalet. 65k and like 3,000 meters of climbing.
Mm-hmm.
You know, in terms of stage racing, where it's going, you know, how do you see the evolution? Do you think it's a good thing, those types of stages, and do they excite you?
Yeah, I think it's, you know, if we look at what's a typical Tour de France, 90, 95 hours of racing, how much of that racing is really even interesting? Yeah. I mean, in reality, it's probably 10% of the race, 15% of the race is really of much substance, versus how much of the race is helicopter shots of castles, which, I mean, beautiful architecture, but it's not interesting from a racing perspective. So I think that actually, particularly, you know, this popularity that you see of these short mountain stages are good, because the race happens from kilometer 0, and you can watch the whole race, and it's exciting and engaging. And I think, you know, putting it on a Saturday or a Sunday when people can watch the whole stage, I think it's a good idea. I don't think we should scrap big stages. I think that there is, just in the way that there's value to really explosive short mountain stages, I also think there's value to a 200K day with 5,000 meters of climbing in the Giro. You know, it's different racing. I think it adds like a epic sort of factor.
Yeah, I mean, there's such a history in the sport. It's like they were doing 350k stages, mountain stages, and now it's like, only 200, now only 65, but it's a whole mix.
Yeah, I think the mix is good. I think big mountain stages, short, explosive mountain stages are good. The only thing maybe I'd say we don't need is like, you know, the odd 230k flat sprint day with no wind. Because it's just sort of, I mean, you're really just transferring from one place to another. And I guess you could argue, well, otherwise you're just doing it on the bus. But I think it makes the racing a bit boring and a bit negative almost, because it's like, well, if there's no outstanding features, no wind, a dead flat day.
Well, you're only going to watch the last 10k, 20k, whatever.
Right. And I don't think it encourages, you know, like from a breakaway perspective, it's like, why would you go in the break on a day like that? Which is a bit boring.
Yeah, you want to encourage the racing instead of just like, you know, reserve racing. It's interesting because when we scoped out the tour route, I mean, like everyone, I think it's just going to be an awesome race, 2018, and hopefully it's going to sort of set that precedence. I think they've got such a good mix now. Stage 17, well, actually a couple of stages which pop out. The Alpine stage up over the Glière with a bit of gravel, which is nice. Obviously the cobbles early on. So you kind of got this whole spectrum of, I think whoever wins that race is going to be the complete rider. You've got to deal with the cobbles. Okay, there's a little bit of off-roady gravel. Portet, I'm hoping they're going to keep gravel. There's 6 sections of gravel on that at the moment, and it's just mint. I mean, it's easy to ride it. It's not a problem. But I've got a feeling they're going to pave that, which is going to ruin the character of the climb, in my opinion. So you've got cobbles, gravel, then you've got this 65k unknown stage, which hasn't been done before up the Portet. And then 2 days later on the 19th, you've got the big 5 climb monster of the Pyrenees, which is the last mountain stage. So it's kind of like you've got everything you've described there from you've gone super short and punchy through to, I think it's Aspan, Tourmalet, I mean, it's a beast. Bordes, Soulor, and then Cirque du Tour up to Abyss down to Laronin. Like that, and that's a 200k stage. That is mint. I mean, coming right at the end of the race as well. I mean, I'm not a masochist by any stretch, but that's going to make for some seriously hardcore racing. Teams with only 8 riders now, it's going to be harder to control it. So do you think that's going to, you know, guys are going to feel the pinch because that 8th or the one rider's missing?
You know, I think, well, to be honest, I think guys are going to feel the pinch or have felt the pinch in the sense that it probably has cost 2 to 3 jobs for riders per team, because, you know, if all these week-long stage races have gone down to 7 and the Grand Tours have gone down to 8, riders teams aren't looking to hire riders just to have riders around. And obviously budgets are limited. I don't think that cutting one guy out of a Grand Tour team or even a 1-week stage race or classic team has a great impact on how easy it is to control the race. I think nor do I really think that it has a huge impact on, the talk of the safety of a smaller peloton. I sort of think that you'd need to cut teams down to probably 6 guys for it to be a major impact. There certainly is an impact, but I think, cutting 2 or 3 guys off Grand Tour team sizes has an exponentially larger impact on the ability for stronger teams to control. So if what you're after is more interesting racing, I'm not sure that that was a great way to go about it. And I'm sort of surprised that amongst the riders there wasn't more guys that were outspoken about that, because when I saw that they were looking to limit the team size, my first thought was like, well, teams are going to downsize on their roster a bit, and it's not going to be the Sagan's and Froomes that feel the effects of that. It's going to be the guys lower on the totem pole.
It's not quite gone all the way. You need to go all the way and make the racing more entertaining because you've got less riders. Yeah, I'd never looked at it from that perspective. You know that people are going to get job cuts, which is inevitably you want to try and grow the sport. How are you going to do that? Well, we're going to make it more interesting. So we're going to cut the number of riders, which is now going to make the sport harder for people to get a solid contract. They're in a real tricky situation to try and navigate.
Right, and I guess I'm not sure that only one rider less has much of an impact from a race interest point of view, but I do think it impacts the number of jobs available. And it's just surprising to me that from the rider's point of view, there wasn't more of an outcry about that.
Especially, there's a lot of riders who could be on that part of the totem pole which gets cut.
Yeah, and to be honest, I'd say the majority of riders are never too far away from that. There are certain guys that probably are always going to have a contract, as long as within reason, like the really top performers. But the vast majority of the peloton are not guys that win prolifically. That's a pretty small group of guys, and for the rest, it's a pretty touch and go sort of marketplace in terms of securing contracts every year, every 2 years, or whatever. So to me, it's just I was sort of didn't really understand why there wasn't more talk about that. But from my point of view, if you wanted to make the racing more interesting, and from a team size perspective, I think it would need to be 6 riders, and maybe you do six rider teams at the tour, and there's a couple more teams invited.
Yeah, it could be interesting.
Yeah.
Time will tell.
Yeah.
Who knows what's around the corner.
Right.
So, I like the way the sport's changing with the sort of more dynamic stages. I think it's good to throw them into the mix. One thing which we actually chatted about, must have been probably the summer or back into the summer, was obviously we're all about the climbing here at the Col Collective and going uphill and enjoying the moment and getting to the top and looking at the views. But I think it was probably actually around the time there seemed to be this big attack on the hour record. And I don't know where I read about it on, maybe it was Van News or something social media, and you were talking about the concept of what if you can do it for an hour, an hour record on the track or whatever. Can we do something climbing? And I thought that was a really interesting concept, because it seems that there's a TT. Why not go see how much vertical elevation you can get in an hour?
Yeah.
So where did that idea stem from, and where are you at with it? Because we want to see it.
Well, it started, I was doing an interview at a team camp in, I guess it was the end, maybe December of 2016. with Cayley Fretz. At the time he was at Velo News. And it was sort of one of those, journalists always give you these open-ended questions at the end of an interview, like, well, is there anything you want to add? And I was like, no, not really, because it's usually a trick question. But I was like, no, not really. I mean, do you want me to add anything as well, if anything's on your mind? And that just sort of popped into my head just at that moment. I hadn't thought of it before. Because I think we were talking about like how popular the hour record had become, and I was like, well, what if they did one uphill? He's like, oh, that's interesting. And I was just thinking like, well, I mean, what if we measured, obviously on the track, it's, how far you ride, but what if we did an outdoor one and you measured how much you've gained in elevation? And, he was like, yeah, but what about controlling the variables? And I was sort of like, well, that's the whole point. That, to me, that's what's more interesting about it, is like, if you could go find a climb that is, ideally you'd be looking at a climb with starting at as low of an elevation as possible, with as steep and consistent of a grade as possible, topping out at as low of a altitude as possible at the top, with favorable wind, favorable temperature, and favorable road surface.
Yeah.
So it's quite
strategic.
It's interesting, like, if you really did some searching, you could probably find some pretty cool parts of the world that have some pretty cool roads, and it would just be an interesting project. And then I started to think about it more, and I was like, well, I don't know, maybe that's something that people would be interested in, even in the greater public, because the hour record on the track is quite exclusive. Yeah. I mean, I don't even know, like, here where the closest track is. I've ridden on a track twice in my life. Yeah. Whereas seeing how much you can climb in an hour is...
Oh, he's genius.
It's pretty accessible.
That's why I jumped on it and said, hey, if you take this idea forward, I think it's just...
Yeah.
It's something where the sport needs to attract, for the sponsors, for everything, for the spectacle of the sport. It's about being dynamic. It's about, like, if we always do the same thing, you attract the same people.
Right.
Year on year. In doing something new like that, obviously we're a little bit biased towards climbing, but it doesn't matter. It's interesting.
Right. And I think, honestly, that it has value to the sport in that, say you were to actually pursue this and you created a bit of media interest around it, and say you went to Cannondale and you said, look,
build me that super light bike.
Let's build like a prototype one-off bike. And I actually thought about like the rules for this. I was like, well, how crazy can you go? Personally, I think you should ditch the weight limit, because I think the UCI is not helping the progress of the industry by having a weight limit at this point. But like, maybe you have a rule like the bike has to be able to be ridden down safely in half the time, in 30 minutes. Yeah. So you need to have a break of some kind. Yeah. And from a tech standpoint, it's sort of interesting.
Yeah, but I think it's like, why don't you just get rid of all the rules and go build the best bikes and just throw it out there for brands and industries? That's where technology comes from. Right. You build the stuff and then they go, oh yeah, actually we could use that on a production bike. It might not be exactly the same, but they just have all these audacious ideas. Have it without a brake on. You know, just go full bore and give people, like the fans, wow, I've never seen a bike like that before. Look at that little innovation there which they've done. Look how they've shaved that off. Right. Just go full bore.
Because think how much interest it would draw just around the equipment.
Oh, it'd be huge.
If you were like, no, we're not going to follow any of the UCI rules.
Yeah. It's not a UCI event. You just do what you think. It'll be huge.
Yeah.
It'll be huge.
Yeah.
Col Collective sponsored. It's got to be.
Yeah.
It's got to be.
Yeah. I think it and I thought about, actually a number of people had asked me about doing it because I think it had been floated out there in the media. And I was like, yeah, I would consider it. It was a bit though, like, obviously I'm a pro cyclist and I have to focus on doing my job, and it's certainly a diversion. So I was a bit like, well, okay, if I go to the Giro and, have a great ride and then, string together some nice results, and then it fits in a time that would theoretically work. And I've sort of achieved because like at the end of the day, like I need to be doing what I need to do in the race. So yeah, I mean, it certainly is on the cards. And obviously because of that sort of like catch, it's a bit like, maybe it's a little bit like thrown together, like, okay, I'll do it now. Because it is a little bit of I mean, I certainly wouldn't be training specifically for it.
But you can hold the form which you've got from the season and try and time it right. So you go, oh, maybe I've just back off here a touch because I've got a nice easy week, and then just hit it hard. Almost use it as one of your training, like a training session or something. So it's not, you're not peaking for it per se, but just get something out.
And the thing is, if I'm the first one to do it, then I am the world record holder. Yeah,
exactly. Nice jersey. I honestly, when you said the idea, I was like, crikey, why has no one thought of that first? And it's got to be done. It's got to be done. And as I say, UCI sanctioned event and all that, put that to one side. Go to town, because Phil Gaiman's obviously doing his climbing challenges and everything, which gets a lot of momentum. I watch the videos, I think it's cool. You go around and you smash a load of climbs, and this is sort of like almost the pros way of doing it. Saying, I mean, even if it's your own personal challenge, just to see what you can hit, what VAM score you can hit. What can I get, I mean, I'd love to watch it, and I'm pretty sure there's plenty of people like me out there would tune in. And
and that's the thing. I mean, part of me was like, this is a bit dorky, and like, I'm a pro. What are other pros thinking of this like dorky idea?
Honestly.
But on the other hand, I was like, actually, there's probably people that would find it quite interesting, and I think even like the bike industry, if you're like, let's have a professional rider do this and we'll talk a bit about it, and the bike industry can go and create, a crazy one-off thing. I mean, I would if someone else was doing it, I would follow it just because it's sort of interesting.
I think that's kind of the proving ground, really. Are you interested in it if someone else did it? Yeah, I am actually. And it's like, well, that's why exactly the point. When you mentioned it, as I say, it was a little tweet here or whatever. And it was like, I mean, there's a amount of social media out there, I just blank it all out because it's all white noise. And you come back to it and go, hang on a minute, that's a good idea. So, I think, no pressure or anything, but it would be cool. It would be cool to do. But if you can do it just like, as you say, you fit it into your calendar, it's not a big priority, but I think you get some great coverage from it, and we're tuned in. So you won't be alone. So it's been awesome. Cool. Just one final question. Anything else you want to
add? No, I don't have any more big ideas floating around in my head, so...
time to knuckle down and get the season going. So good luck for Catalonia.
Thanks.
It's been an absolute pleasure, and thanks for taking time out. I could rabbit on for hours, so we'll better call it a day there.
Cool.
Thanks very much, Joe. Cheers.